Hey everyone, I'm Crystal Jagrup, and this is Empowered by Women. In August of 2021, I launched Book of Bijou, which is a line of chic and innovative jewelry storage. And in January of 2022, we expanded into what you now see as the Empowered by Women platform. I really wanted to create a centralized space where we can really put emphasis on our mission of women empowerment and community over competition. It really truly does fill my cup to be surrounded by so many of you inspiring women, and the energy that you bring to me and our platform on a daily basis is unmatched. You really all do fuel me with so much motivation to continue doing what I'm doing, and for that, I thank you for being a part of our community, for joining me here today, and just for the ongoing support. I really cannot express how grateful I am and how much it means to me. So again, thank you so much. Before we jump into the episode, please be sure to follow or subscribe to us wherever you are listening, whether you're watching on YouTube or you're listening on your favorite podcast platform. And also don't forget to share your favorite episodes with your fellow female founders so that we can continue growing our platform and furthering our mission. All right, let's go ahead and jump into this next interview with another incredible woman in entrepreneurship that I know you guys are going to absolutely love. Today, we have the incredible Lisa Haukom joining us today. She is the founder of the Golden Brands Co. And I am so excited to be diving into her journey. It is going to be a powerful one. So first and foremost, Lisa, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here, Crystal. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So you're a four-time entrepreneur, which I definitely want to dive into. But you also promote yourself as a story-based self-portrait photographer, which is so intriguing. And I'm so curious about that. And the virtual photography that you offer also just like equally blows my mind. Why don't you go ahead and just jump into your background, that whole four-time entrepreneurship journey that's led you to creating the Golden Brand and what the Golden Brand is.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for teeing that up for me. I think that with entrepreneurship specifically, sometimes there's parts of ourselves we have to feel, or we figure we have to leave them at the door. There's parts of ourselves that aren't relevant to what we're bringing into the work that we do or the community that we're building or how we show up, as a business leader. And I think that those parts are not only relevant, but I think that they're pivotal in a lot of cases. So for me, going on that journey and the way that that led up to the Golden Brand, specifically in the self-portrait studio, I tried on a lot of hats in my previous business. So my background is in art history and architecture. And so it's really interesting that now I deal in the space of beauty, visual beauty, what is beautiful, or maybe what is unconventionally beautiful, and helping people see that through their portraits. And I took some detours just creatively. I am a chef as well. I had a catering company. I had a clothing line at one point, but the through line for everything was my story as I can't make a living as a creative. That's how I grew up. Like, if you're dealing in something as impractical as creating and adding more beauty into the world, it's not only valid, but it's not profitable. So I kept going down different avenues with these different businesses and then hitting the roadblock of feeling like I sort of tapped it out. And because I was in denial about the piece I loved with everything. The through line was that excavating of the story and how that shows up to, I guess I'll just use the word branding, how that shows up in your branding, how you're putting that forward. And that's the part that brought me joy. So what I did right before the Golden Brand was actually brand strategy work, was helping people dive into their brand strategy. And what kept coming up, because I was working with a lot of online entrepreneurs, was this block of showing up, right? So the missing piece for them and the part that they were the most resistant to give and add into their business or their brand was the part everybody wanted to know the most about them. It was either seeing them or that one key piece of their story that made what they do make sense to the people who want to buy it. And what I kept coming down to was people didn't want to show up. They didn't feel good about being seen. They didn't feel like they were worthy of being out there. And I recognize that in myself. So this is a long-winded way of saying that was when I decided I needed to handle that for myself first. And so that's how I started taking self-portraits, and I put myself through 30 days of self-portrait. There was no self-kindness in it at this point. That came later. It was very much this is what I have to do to get to the point where I can build the business I want. And so it had this unintentional consequence of kind of blowing my mind. And you have a similar story too, right? Like with your jewelry, like you had this need to innovate something that wasn't there before. And then you saw the connection about how you can build a community and how that so many other people can relate to something that you thought you were isolated with. And so that's kind of the background of how everything evolved between the Golden Brand, the virtual photography I do, and the self-portrait studio. And the story is your relevance in all of it. You know, it's not curating for what people want you to show up as, it's curating how you want to show up.
I love that so much. And that's so powerful and profound. And I want to dive more into that. Um, but I want to ask about, the entrepreneurship journey that led up to it first, before we get into the self-portraiture. So talk to us about like the mindset and potential stigma that came with, pivoting. I think there is that fine line of, knowing when to pivot and then when are those times where it seems like you're just giving up because it gets too hard. I don't think that was the space that you were in, right? You said yourself you felt like you capped out in those places that you were in with your catering and then clothing. But was it hard for you to kind of go through that change of pivoting from completely different industries and kind of sharing that with your audience? What was that experience like?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's some times when you're so passionate about going down a particular route and you put so much effort, and then, especially when you have a family or people who are impacted by that decision, and then you decide you want to veer, there can be a lot of shame and a lot of guilt associated with making that decision. In fact, I think that's how and why people stay in jobs too long and then they go into that burnout mode, right? Because they're not honoring that. So it was, yeah. I mean, each one of them was like a little death. It was also kind of heartbreaking because I kept feeling like, well, this is it. This is the thing this time, right? And my family would rally and everybody would rally. And then I would get down the road and I would realize, okay, this is closer this time, but it's still not exactly what I want. But with each iteration, I got closer. And with each iteration, I became better at recognizing, okay, this has more elements than the last thing did, but it's still not perfectly the thing I want to show up for every single day. And I had to get really honest with myself about the parts of those things I didn't like showing up for. And then I had to do a lot of mindset work and a lot of deservingness work around the fact that I could have something with all parts that I want to show up for. I don't have to, eat the pieces that I don't actually want to be eating. I can only have things on my plate that are appetizing.
It really is so important to recognize the power of just showing up. I think there are so many people that get stuck in the planning mode, right? And trying to nail down all those little perfect details like, okay, this is exactly what I want. This is exactly how it's going to look in the future for the next 5, 10, 15 years. You don't realize until you actually start doing it, like, oh, I don't actually want this, or I do actually want to focus more on this aspect of it, which is something that I completely didn't even think about. So there is that power for just showing up, doing it, allowing yourself that ability to be kind of fluid in whatever your path is going to be. And I like that you said that you were practicing your deservingness and, really going through those iterations and finding what feels true to you and being honest to yourself, because that I think is where a lot of people kind of miss out. Like you said, they get stuck in those jobs that they don't really love because, they feel like, okay, this is what I've chosen, this is my life. And they settle into that original commitment when really they have that option to pivot as needed
Yeah.
and when it feels truer to them and can provide them that happiness. And it's so
important to be able to make that shift. So I'm glad you had that support to continue doing that as you were, figuring your way through whatever felt right to you. And then when you pivoted into photography, you were in your late 40s, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes. And photography was there the whole time, but it was the thing I
Mhm,
tried really hard not to do. I tried
mhm.
really hard not to become a photographer.
But you had that calling in the back of your mind, right? There was always that little itch in the back of your head, and you were like, okay, you know what? I'm going to dive into it. But there was that hesitation for you. I read into a little bit of your story, and that there was that hesitation of diving into something completely brand new, something that you just said you've been kind of trying to avoid. And then at such, what you felt like was such a late stage in your life. But how has it been since? And what was that? What was the mindset behind that?
Well, I mean, you've done your research very, very well. And so the impetus was I think I had avoided who I was in the bigger picture for so long. And I was focused on what I could do that was easily, and it came easy to me. And I was giving a lot of that. And the satisfaction I was receiving from that was what I was able to give to others, right? What did it unlock for somebody? How did this make someone else's life better, easier, elevate them? But I didn't stop and ask the question of how is this elevating me until midlife. And then that was where I realized, one, very practically, pandemic, other things, I moved online and I had to show up and I had to look at myself on camera. And I felt like I needed to share my own photo. And that was really hard for me. So I sort of came full circle and then ran right smack into myself at that point where the work I'd been doing with people before, specifically for brand strategy and asking them to show up, I realized I wasn't doing that as well. And I also realized that I didn't really know who I was. I knew who I was in relation to my parents or my spouse or my child, but I couldn't really tell you who I was or what I wanted. And I don't even think there was a time when I felt like the loss of that because it was just such a part of me. I didn't even realize I was missing that. And so going into the self portraits and starting that journey and like actually seeing myself and then seeing myself again and anew each time, um, it was, I mean, it was hard. I'm on the other side of it now, and like I said, I did it for 30 days, and I like to talk about the transformation of where I am now, but I do want people to know that when you're starting to ask yourself those questions and examine where you are, it's not the super sexy, glossy Instagram version. Like it gets ugly and it gets real pretty quickly, but it's also temporary. You know what I mean? To look at those parts and really examine that. And I think I lost the thread of your question, but I think I also answered the question as well. Did I?
Yeah, no, that was great. I really like that, at first you were already coming from a place of service, but then you recognized that you weren't serving yourself. And I think the really profound moment is that when you recognize that you serving yourself does add that special layer to how you can show up for other people, that's when it really becomes magical, when you're allowing yourself to be very vulnerable and be very honest and raw. And I love that you forced yourself into this 30-day experiment to help you to get to that point. I think that's such a great story. And is this 30-day journey of self-portraiture something that you guide your clients through? Is that something that you're kind of encouraging them to do as well?
Well, yes, in a different form. So we do an 8-week photo challenge inside the self-portrait studio, and it's very different. I mean, we're doing it as a group. Everybody is on their own. What happens in your personal space when you do your self-portrait session is very unique to you with what you're taking through. So I have everybody set their intention, and then I do curate and craft some of those creative prompts for them, which I didn't give myself. I did a little bit of looking on Pinterest and creating mood boards and setting intentions for my sessions later. But in the beginning, it was just very almost like drill sergeant, sit, pose, do this, do this. And so in the self portrait studio, I'm guiding them with the self kindness and compassion that I learned to have for myself. So they're starting from that place of kindness and self-compassion. And they're all going through it together too. So each of these women, they know that during the week, when it's time to create your self-portrait, and you're going to show up on Thursday and share it with the group, that if they're feeling a little raw or a little exposed with that, they just picture all the other women that week in their own homes doing the same thing. And they know that they're all going to be showing up feeling the same way. So they have that community that they get to grow with, and they get to see themselves reflected back in the other members who are like, remember your first picture? Look at this, like, especially when they show up and they don't feel like it was such a great growth week for them, or it didn't quite turn out how you wanted it to, because I mean, let's face it, what does turn out exactly like you expect it to, right? And I don't
Right.
want anybody thinking that photos are different. So that's something we break down as well, is like, well, what is working here? And maybe you created something completely different than what your intention was, which is why I love that you brought up the whole concept of pivots, because I think when it comes to setting your expectations for anything, even your photos, you have to be willing to be open to the pivot. Like, you may have to say, what I ended up creating is actually better than what I thought I wanted in the first place.
And that's when it's like more, it feels more powerful and you feel more accomplished. And it's something to be so proud of when it's like it exceeds any expectation you could have envisioned for yourself.
Hmm?
Yes, absolutely. So first of all, for anyone that's listening, and self-portrait photographer kind of sounds a little conflicting. So how does that even work to begin with? Because
Okay, so
self-portraits, you would think, you're just taking pictures of yourself. You don't need someone to do it for you, right? So how do
that
you
is
do that?
correct. So that is the first piece, is you are doing this on your own. You're not having someone else's energy on the other side of the camera being bounced back to you. It's not influencing your space, which is also a through line with my remote sessions as well. I'm not in front of my clients with a big camera pointed at them. They're just looking at their cell phone and hearing my voice. So it's essentially like they are in their own company. And so that's what it's like when you sit down for your session. And there's some psychology and some takeaways that we go through inside the studio, and some reasons why we don't use the selfie side of the camera. We actually use I've got a visual for you here. We actually use, I'm calling this the back side of the camera. So when you're sitting, you're looking at this. So you're not actually seeing yourself on the front, which also feels weird. But I love that, because when we do get somebody that's joining the membership and maybe they have a little bit of an advantage, maybe they're a photographer, because we do have photographers that go through, or maybe they deal in visual arts a lot. They don't have an advantage over anyone else in this work, because by virtue of using specifically the phone in your pocket and then not using that selfie side, figuring out how to stay in the frame and be in the frame, and how to pose and move without being able to see yourself, puts everyone on the same starting line. So that's how we do. That's a little bit different. And there's some remote capabilities for firing the shutter, and people all have their different favorites, but there's like Bluetooth remotes. There's apps that you can use that you can set to fire continuously, or you can do what I do, which is play hide the clicker, which is what I tend to do. Just hold like the remote clicker in my hand and get creative with putting that different places. But that is such a small part of it. And I try to keep the tech really, really simple, because, I find that if we were to show up and I was going to say, I'm going to teach you how to do this on your DSLR, and you're going to tether so you can see yourself on your laptop and all these other things. So many people are out when they hear that much tech involved. And so it really removes excuses when I say, take the phone that's in your back pocket and put it on a tripod. And if you don't have a tripod, stick it in a sneaker. And if you don't have a sneaker, stick it in a can of coffee beans. But you have no excuses for not getting started. So that's what I mean when I say self-portraits, and they have an intention behind them. So that's the other key part. Selfies tend to be, we capture them in the moment, and they're fleeting. They're meant to capture like something quick on the go, but self-portraits they're planned, they're researched. We're looking at inspiration. We're deciding what we want to create, and everybody has the same prompt. So for example, we do one called, which one do I want to give you? Curves. And this was the first body conscious prompt that we actually did 2 challenges ago. I purposely avoided anything body conscious or purposefully aesthetic because that's not where we put our emphasis. And so curves could be interpreted as, showing your jawline, the nape of your neck, your hands. They could be more revealing if you wanted to go into more of a boudoir mode. We left that to comfort zones, but people show up with their interpretation of that prompt. And it really, it always blows my mind with how different. Nobody ever shows up with the same 2 things, ever.
I can imagine how interesting that would be to get the results back and see how everyone's interpreting those different prompts. I really love how you do that. That sounds really incredible and creative, and kind of just like it just inspires you to continue doing more and seeing, how else you can push their boundaries. I like how you remove that layer of, the person behind the camera. First of all, like for me, for instance, that makes things just super awkward, just that in and of itself. And then you even remove that layer of them being able to see themselves on that camera. So, like, all judgment is gone. They just have to trust themselves and do what feels good. And, like you said, it kind of just levels the playing field for anyone. They don't have that like external validation of what they look like. And they just have to get to that point of feeling good about themselves. And you mentioned, that for you, when you started your 30-day journey, you didn't start it with self kindness. It was kind of just a challenge for yourself. So, how do you think this idea of self portraiture can lead to that moment where you are starting to be kinder with yourself and you are starting to get to that point of self love and really cherishing every little thing about yourself? Why do you think that helps so much to get you to that point?
It's so good because, sometimes people join and they're not sure why they're joining and they're like, I'm really magnetized to this and I don't know why. This is something I want. Um, and I need good photos, right? So they think they're going to get good photos, which is kind of what I thought I was going to get out of it when I did the 30-day challenge. And what I ended up getting was this self-kindness and self-compassion. So part of that comes from, when somebody shows you a picture of yourself you don't like they snap the family photo and they're like, oh, this is so good of everybody. Look, and they show it to you and you're like, oh my God, that's so hideous. I can't even look at it. You won't look at it. So part of what we do is it's not a rule, but I strongly encourage the members to not delete, because you may find that this part of you that's triggering you when you look at this photo now, and is the part that you need to develop kindness for. So by keeping those early sessions and not brutally deleting them, because members first time, second time will typically shoot between 150 and 200 photos, just to give you an idea. And they'll brutally delete it and they'll go, they'll come up to that first challenge call with me and they'll go, this was the only good one from that whole batch. They always say, this was the only good one. And I'm like, well, did you delete the rest? Right? Some do, some don't. But what happens is you keep going, you take the photos and you stop and you look at them, and you ask yourself, you're learning to cultivate your eye, and you're learning to train to see yourself like a photographer would, like somebody who looks at you, doesn't know you, doesn't know your inner stories, and is like, God, you're so beautiful, your cheekbones, and look at the way the light's hitting you right now, and you're so symmetrical, and oh my God, your profile, right? Like that's what they see of you. So you're learning how to do that for yourself. You're learning how to say, like, I really like the way that my presence is in this photo. I really like the way that I'm upturned a little toward the camera. And that's making me really like my cheeks, where usually I think my cheeks were really big, but I actually see that, oh, I just have really high cheekbones. I have angles, right? You're learning those things. So as you're moving through and you're stopping and you're looking, you're getting less triggered. So then you get to the end, then you go back to those first photos and you suddenly realize that there's so many things you love about those first photos, because your face isn't changing. Your insides are changing. Your relationship to yourself and your appearance is changing. So That's the self-kindness journey that you go on. And just like anything, you need time. You're not going to get it from having like 2 self-portrait sessions. Do you know what I mean? It takes time to cultivate a new relationship with yourself, especially if you spent your whole life talking to yourself in a completely different way.
You're almost like a mindset coach, right? You're trying
Yeah.
to shift the way that they're looking at themselves and at the world, and not like immediately focusing on, oh, this isn't good, get rid of that, get rid of that. But okay, aside from that, like what is good? What do you like? What can you praise yourself for? And then that, being able to focus your mindset on that just changes the energy, and then you build that momentum and you get to that place of self-kindness and self-compassion. I love that so much. That's incredible. So for people that are listening today, I mean, we of course most of our audience are small business owners, and I think it is so critical to be able to show up and be on camera and be yourself and be authentic, because that's really, you are the selling point, right? It's not just your product or services. So what tips do you have for our entrepreneurs to start getting comfortable in front of the camera today?
I would say stop avoiding it. If you're avoiding it, recognize that you're avoiding it. Maybe ask yourself why. And then I would look into where you are comfortable showing up, because for most people it's not a blanket to everything. So you don't usually get the trifecta of voice, photo, video. Like there's usually some segue in there. There's usually something that you're comfortable with. So I think recognizing if you're comfortable on video and not photos, which I hear a lot, is, well, what are you doing during the video? What are you seeing during the video? And how can you replicate that into maybe a photography session? And I think sometimes the disconnect there is, great, Lisa, I'm confident on video, but I have a brand photo shoot and this photographer took all my photos and I don't like anything that they took. They couldn't get one good picture of me. And part of that is recognizing where you're giving away some of that creative control and creative power to other people. So what I always say to somebody, like so members of the Self-Portrait Studio sometimes will, or often will, book a photo shoot with me. We'll end up shooting together and I get to do a professional shoot with them, which is great. Once they've gone through that arc, they know themselves on camera. So when I get into those virtual sessions with them, they're telling me what they want. They're showing me they're giving it to the camera right away, and they're taking that over rather than, okay, I'm just going to show up as I am and trust that a photographer is going to be able to capture this for me. So I would just look at your experience so far and what that has been, and where are there moments where you could have directed somebody a little bit more to get a different photo of you, or been more involved in that creative process. And then the other thing I would say too is I would really watch your selfie intake, because I'm going to give you a little giveaway that we do in the Self-Portrait Studio, but your selfie cam is flipped. It's flipped. And so if you're looking at selfies a lot, or if you're looking at Instagram stories a lot, it's also flipped. And if you're looking at Zoom, it's also flipped. So you're looking at a mirror image of your face and you like it because it's the one you look at when you get ready in the morning in the mirror. It's the same thing. It's showing you, I like this. This is good. This looks like me. Then you go get your photo taken and the photographer shows you your picture, which is not flipped. And your mind goes haywire. And you're like, whoa, I don't look like that. What's wrong with your camera? You're used to looking at this reversed image of yourself. So if you want to start to think of, is it really me? Is it really this photo that I don't like? I would ask yourself if you can maybe unflip some of those things. There's a setting on Zoom, you can unflip your camera. Mine is non-mirrored, so the one I'm seeing of myself is the non-mirrored side. And my phone also, when I turn on that selfie cam, is the non-mirrored side, so it's not flipped. So it's the opposite of what I see in the mirror.
Interesting. I didn't even know that was a feature. I'm gonna have to try that out. I am curious what your growth journey has been like, because it's a new thing. Well, at least for me, it's not something that I've ever heard of. And you are asking people to be quite vulnerable. and quite raw and very, very honest with themselves, which can be very hard for some people. So, how did you start growing and getting your members, and what was that journey like? And what are some of the obstacles that you faced in growing, if there's any to share?
Yeah. Well, I can tell you right now, just from entrepreneur to entrepreneur, one of the biggest obstacles was explaining what it is. And it's
Mm.
really hard to talk about the fact that someone's going to be taking their photo and they're going to be leaving with photos, but it's not really about the photos. I mean, yeah, you have a camera roll full of great images. That's the takeaway, but it's a healing journey, and it's a self-trust journey, and it's really an invitation to come see yourself, and then come see yourself again, and see yourself again, and see yourself again, because we're always growing and changing on the path of life. And that person who I sat down with in over there in that corner and did the 30 days with, she's not here anymore. She's a completely different person. So if I hadn't learned how to set up a path for myself where I could keep checking in and seeing myself again and again where I am, and like where I'm at in that particular moment, then I don't know. I think sometimes too, as entrepreneurs, we tend to get stuck, and then we feel resentful and we feel bitter and we blame the business. But sometimes it's just a matter of recalibrating and coming back and saying, okay, well, how does this fit who I am right now, and who am I right now, and how can I see that and have that reflected? And then the self-portrait studio grew for a while. I started having conversations with other women about this, and then I started to get invited on podcasts to talk about it and talk to their groups and do workshops. And so it was a grassroots thing for me that I started getting people, but most of the women in the studio have found out about it because they've heard it from another member. And then my photography clients as well are word of mouth and referral primarily. So that, just to answer that practical question for you.
Mm. So were you talking about, the services that you are offering, or your particular 30-day journey? Okay.
I
Yeah,
was
see,
talking about myself.
that's where that connection is, and that's where you build that community, right? When you just start coming from a very personal place
Mhm.
and you're showing everyone the real you, and that's where your place of service really, that's where it's founded and rooted. What do you think the percentages of the people that are coming for like the healing aspect of it? Because you've promoted that, right? It's not just portraits. It's way deeper than that. It's way more profound than that. And then what percentage is coming for like, I think these photos are gonna be great.
I would say the second group of, I think these photos, I'm going to get great photos. No one leads with that anyway. So if it's in there, they're not leading with that. But I think I would say less than 2 or 1%. And what's interesting is when somebody does come into the group with that energy, because the energy is so cohesive, and the women that are in there, they've tried other things. So it's
Mhm.
not like they've heard about this and they're like, oh, this is great. This is going to be the first self-discovery journey that I take. Like the women in the self-portrait studio have the self-awareness to know what they've tried maybe hasn't worked before, or wasn't quite what they were looking for, and they know they're looking for something different, so they're all open and receptive. So when somebody does join the group, it's pretty evident right away their energy is different. Now sometimes that's defensive energy because they're scared, they're nervous, and we get them to open up after time. And there's usually one in every challenge that resists, and they're always looking for the easy, quick takeaway. And I have to like put on my tough love hat, usually around like a week 4 or 5 of the challenge, and go, look, here's the doorway. They're over here because they walked through it. All you got to do is walk through the door. It's here, but it's totally up to you. And once they do, it's like this, it's just amazing, of course. But uh, the resistance we get, or the different energy that comes in, is usually that it's nobody's really coming there for photos because they're doing it all. And the live calls where I'm talking about their photos, I'm giving them feedback and helping them identify um, where they only see where the photo maybe fell short, and helping them see why it was a success. Like, hey, you didn't realize it, but this intention you set over here, you're actually doing it in this photo, and it's really coming through, right? So I'm helping them see that. But occasionally I'll put photos in Lightroom and I'll edit them. Now, when I say editing, I mean polishing, because I want everyone to understand that most of what you see has been edited in some way, shape, or form. So we do color corrections, because sometimes what we think is a bad photo is, well, you had your overhead lighting on and it was yellow. So if we take away that, now you can see this is actually a really beautiful photo once we just correct that little, lighting thing. So I will do that for people's pictures as well. So they do get to see the transformation of making those little adjustments, but then they learn how to do the setup so that you don't have to do the editing part at the end. That's where the gold is.
That sounds amazing. I know I've looked at your website before, but I'm assuming you have galleries of some of your members.
I do. Yeah. Actually, on the
Okay.
membership page, everything except for the photos of me, which I took
Mhm.
myself, there's a couple of me on that page. All the other photos in there are members' photos that they took of themselves, and then they've actually gone on to put them on their websites or use them for their podcast covers or whatever. It just, yeah. I mean, they end up with the gorgeous photos, but
Mhm.
they're more importantly, when they look at those photos, they're like, yeah, I love that. That's me. And there's no artifice. Like, I peeled everything back and I did that. And I still like that photo of me, or I like it even more now. So,
Right. Yes. It brings them back to that core and to that really, really deep rooted love for themselves and respect
uh,
for themselves. And that's so powerful. Oh my God. I love it so much. I love what you're doing, Lisa. Where can everyone find you?
okay, come talk to me on the Golden Brand Co. on Instagram, or the Golden Brand Co. on my website. And let me see, we're starting the next, I don't know when this will, well, I do know when this will air. We're starting off the next round of our challenge, May 18th. So if the challenge is in progress, don't feel like you can't join. There's still value in getting in. And I'm also putting out a new product soon called the Self Photo Starter, which is like a little appetizer for the self portrait studio. But it addresses those key things of, hey, Lisa, I want to start self portrait photography. How can I find the best lighting, location, et cetera, in my house? And that'll be coming out in the next month.
Love it. Okay. Of course, all of that will be linked in the show notes. So definitely connect with Lisa. She is incredible. But thank you so much, Lisa, for joining with us today. I said it already, but I really love what you're doing. It's so unique, but it's also just so important work. It's not just photography. There's so many layers to what you're doing, and it's incredible. So thank
Thank
you
you.
so much for sharing your story and what you do.
Yeah, thank you, Crystal. I appreciate you.
Another incredible interview with yet another inspiring woman in entrepreneurship. I hope you guys loved that episode just as much as I did. Before we leave off, if you yourself are also a woman entrepreneur, I would love for you to consider joining our Empowered by Women directory. We're looking for women-owned product and service-based businesses in the US to help us build the go-to place for our communities to find local women to shop with and connect with, and we'd love for you to be a part of it. All of the details can be found on www.empoweredbywomen.com/apply-directory. Of course, that's going to be linked in the show notes below, and you're also welcome to reach out to me anytime if you have any questions. But other than that, thank you again so much for joining us, and I will see you in the next episode.